Sorry?
I said it's up to you.
Okay, so let's start. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again at my kitchen table. This time we have a very special guest, special for me and special for you as well, I hope. My sister-in-law, Rochel. She is married to my brother Menachem, my younger brother, and they live in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's very hot over there. So the air conditioning is working. So once in a while, you'll hear zooming, not Zoom, what we're doing, but real zooming.
Like this.
Now we don't hear.
Okay, it just went on for a second.
So this is just the air conditioning. We can't do anything about that. So just let you know, it's not something strange, it's just the air conditioning. Okay, so we welcome Rochel here at my kitchen table, and we would love to hear from Rochel. Should I say Rochel or Rochele?
Your choice.
How do people call you in school, at your work?
Mora Rachel. I think Mora Rachelet is way too long.
Okay, so we'll say Rochel. Okay, Rochel, would you like to share with us something about where you were born and where you were raised, about your childhood? I would love to hear so the people can know who is later on about a very important thing which is called ADHD.
Okay, so I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I think it's pretty cool. I was born in the same hospital as my grandfather was, which for American Jews is not very common. And I was born 3 days before his birthday and named after his mother. So that's one interesting point. So I was born in Brooklyn. I'm the oldest of 10 children. At this point, my parents were living in Brooklyn temporarily because they were very eager to move on shlichus and start Chabad in the Carolinas. My father had been coming to the Carolinas since 1975, and they were all set to go. So when I was about 3 months old, we moved to the Carolinas, to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live now, and my parents established Chabad. And I grew up with the Chabad house and the school. However, the school was always younger than me. So when they started a kindergarten for the 5-year-olds, I was 8. And when it became first grade, I was already in 4th grade. So I was always 3 years older. So I went to school in Michigan, where my grandparents live, where my mother is also the oldest of 10. So some of my aunts and uncles are closer in age to me than they are to my mother. So it's like my second family. And so that's where I grew up in both. I consider both growing up in Charlotte and in Michigan.
But do you just want to tell the people who your grandfather of your father's side is, because some people might know the significance?
I don't like to, we like to say everyone is precious for who they are, not for who their parents are, but it is very special. My grandfather, Rabbi Groner, was the personal secretary of the Rebbe. And in fact, and because this all happened in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, where I was born, the Rebbe was there when I was named at the Torah. And the Rebbe right away looked at my grandfather and asked if that was his granddaughter. I'm his second grandchild and his oldest granddaughter. And he right away, the Rebbe used to send a letter of Mazel Tov for every baby that was born. So he immediately asked my grandfather, is the letter ready for your granddaughter? And he immediately got the letter ready, signed it, and sent it out to my father. So yes, it was very special.
That's very, very interesting, because your grandfather was the one preparing those letters for the people to to wish the Mazel Tov, in name the Rebbe's Mazel Tov, and here he has to do it for his first granddaughter. Wow, that's really very special. Your grandparents in Michigan are also very special people. Actually, your grandmother is my mother's first cousin.
Yeah, but in North Carolina, we don't like to talk much about that because here it's seen as not exactly, it's not seen as common to marry your cousin, your second cousin or whatever. So we keep that a secret here. I'd say we're related by marriage, but.
Okay, well, I'm here in Holland, so that's why I'm saying it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you say that there was no school, no Jewish place for you to be, and that's the reason why you spent a lot of your youth with your grandparents in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about your parents, your grandparents, the upbringing, the message you learned from them?
So I think the most important thing I learned from my parents and grandparents, who passed it on to me from the Rebbe, is that every single mitzvah is precious. And it's not always about a specific lifestyle, but it's about the mitzvah that we're doing in that moment. And when I first started teaching kindergarten, I was 20 years old. I looked like I was 15. It was my very first class. And I was teaching kosher. And I was very nervous about teaching about eating kosher because I knew that most of my students don't keep kosher. So I prepared myself and I spoke to them about how we're learning about it so that maybe when you grow up, you want to keep kosher, and in school we keep kosher. And one of my students, who is actually Chabad, so one student said, but as I was prepared for, one student said, but Mora, we don't do this at home. And my Chabad student piped up and said, well, if you don't keep kosher, then you're not Jewish. Well, I'm lucky right there and then that that's not true. So I was able to shut that down and say, that's not true. You can't say that. But right away, the explanation came to my head that I explained to the children, and this is something I've heard my mother say thousands of times, that there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah. We can't be good at every single one of them. And so I said to them, I said, Mendel, your family might be really good at keeping kosher, but Caroline's family might be really good at a different mitzvah, like giving tzedakah or lighting Shabbos candles. And I think that message is really what guided my life in general. I would never have been able to say that as a 20-year-old had that not been what I had absorbed it all this time. That's also guided our life, is that every mitzvah is important, not necessarily what we don't do. Does that make sense?
Wow, yes.
Okay.
That makes much sense, and that's quite amazing the way you were able to present it react to the children because of the message you learned. I think it's something that everybody who is here can understand, and I think it's very, very important. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay. Was it difficult for you to be away from your parents, or was being with grandparents and aunts and uncles who were like siblings, like second family?
It was both. It was, on the one hand, I was the spoiled oldest grandchild, and I loved it. When my aunts left home and I was still little and at my grandparents by myself, it was a little harder. But we always knew, and we know, that there was a purpose for this. There was a reason that this is part of the mission. This is, that the Rebbe endorsed this. In fact, my parents wrote to the Rebbe before sending me away, and the Rebbe sent out $1 especially for me. And now that I send my own children, our school here only goes until 5th grade. So most of my children leave home at 11, unless they want to do homeschool and online school. No one's kicked out of the house here. And I tell them this every single time they leave. My daughter Mushka just graduated high school. And her whole graduation speech was all about this. So yes, it may have been hard, but it's also a privilege.
Okay, that's very, very beautiful. Okay, so when you finished high school in Michigan?
No, I actually transferred to the Lubavitch High School in Pittsburgh in 10th grade.
Okay, so you finished high school over there. And what did you do after high school?
I went to a seminary in Bournemouth, England for 2 years. And I had a teacher by the name of Rabbi Vorst who abandoned us in the middle of the year to move to Rotterdam.
Oh, so that was my brother Yehuda.
Yes.
Okay, so he was your teacher in Bournemouth. Okay, that's funny. Okay, so, and after seminary, that's when you got back to Charlotte and started teaching?
Yep.
Okay, so you have been teaching for many years by now. Sometimes I hear things, how your teaching is going and tips you give, and I think you are really an amazing teacher, and I think the children who have you as a teacher are very privileged. So before we go into your teaching, can you still tell us a little bit about how your parents came to Charlotte? You told us that they left when you were a few months old, but I'm sure it wasn't easy.
So it was always a dream of my father, both my parents, it was always a dream of theirs to move on shlichus and open a Chabad house. My mother grew up like that in Michigan because my grandparents were sent on shlichus by the Rebbe to open Chabad in Detroit, Michigan. And my father grew up right next to the Rebbe and heard the Rebbe constantly speaking about this, so he was determined to do so as well. My father had been coming to the Carolinas since 1975 as a young man, just to do programs. I mean, there are people here in Charlotte who remember him from those days, from before he was married. And there are a lot of funny stories about that. I don't know how familiar everyone is with the United States, but North Carolina is the South, past the Mason-Dixon line. And one time my father and his cousin built a sukkah-mobile in New York and drove it down to the Carolinas. And my cousins were amazing carpenters to be able to build a sukkah-mobile in the back of a truck that could travel 600 miles on the highway. And the joke was, the way they knew that they were past the Mason-Dixon line is up north in New York and New Jersey. All the Italians at the toll booths knew exactly what a sukkah was and yelled, "Happy holidays!" and, you know, waved them through. As soon as they got to Maryland and went into Virginia, the toll booth people were like, "What is that? We've never seen anything." I could do this in a real Southern accent. "We've never seen anything like this in our life." And they had no idea. So they knew they were in the South End. So my father was determined to open a Chabad, not just anywhere, but specifically in the Carolinas. In fact, before my parents met, before their first date, my father sent a message to my mother that if she's not interested in opening a Chabad in the Carolinas, then there's no point in them meeting. But she was, thank God, and they got married. And after some studying, because the custom is to stay in Crown Heights and study for a year and then move to your city where you're going to open Chabad, they spoke to the secretary of the Rebbe, Rabbi Chadakov, who was in charge of sending out the emissaries. And they said, you know, we'd like the permission from the Rebbe to move to Charlotte, North Carolina. And Rabbi Chadakov went to speak to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe's answer was to make sure that there was no problem with a mikvah. Young married couple needs a mikvah. So Rabbi Chadakov went to my father and said, "I'm really sorry, it looks like you can't go. The Rebbe wants that there should be no problem with a mikvah, and as far as we know, there is no mikvah in Charlotte, North Carolina." So my father was devastated. This is what he had been preparing for 6 years already. A few weeks later, the Rebbe asked Rabbi Chodakov knew what's happening with the Carolinas. And Rabbi Chodakov said, we are looking for an older couple, a couple that no longer needs to keep the laws of mikveh, to move to Charlotte. And the Rebbe looked at him and said, that's not what I meant. Build a mikveh in Charlotte. And so my parents got the permission to go, but they were very careful with how they went. They didn't actually move until they bought a house. They stayed in hotels, they rented an apartment for a few weeks and went back to New York because until they had a place where the mikveh can be built, they didn't want to actually move. So they bought the house where they still live in today, and they built a mikveh in the basement. We now have a second mikveh, a beautiful, beautiful mikveh. And we like to say that that little mikveh in the basement is the mikveh that built our community, but this new, beautiful mikveh that we built is the mikveh that the community built. So that's one fun story about my parents moving here.
That's very special. I remember seeing the mikveh because when you got married, we all flew to Charlotte, North Carolina. My brother's getting married. We have to be there. And yes, we saw this very special mikveh in your parents' home.
But it's not very beautiful. It's functional and that's about it. It was time for a new one.
Yes, yes. Well, we're talking about some years ago. Yeah. Okay, that's very nice. Are there more interesting stories you want to share about what happened to your parents when going on shlichus?
Well, people were definitely taking bets on how long my parents would last, months, weeks, days. And Baruch Hashem, it's been over 40 years now. So I think we're doing pretty good. So, yeah.
Okay. And I mean, now there are many, many Chabad families there.
That's right. That's right. Baruch Hashem. We run a school, which is owned by the community. And we have a preschool and Hebrew schools and another branch. Charlotte is a very large, in space-wise city. So my sister and brother-in-law opened a Chabad in about 20 minutes away, which is still in the city, but it's a very different area. So Baruch Hashem.
Okay. Okay. So you started teaching and well, I know that HD&D was something that came, sorry. Yeah.
You could just say ADD. We drop the H.
ADD. Okay, I'll say it in Dutch. It's easier for me. ADHD or ADD. It was something that when I grew up, it wasn't heard of, kind of as if it didn't exist. But when it started becoming something that people, started learning about, hearing about, recognizing, I could surely recognize people in my youth that might have had it. So can you tell us about how did it become part of your life?
So how about I share the PowerPoint now, because that's where the story is. Hold that up. Okay. From the beginning. So yes, I gave this presentation to a group of shluchos, just to help them understand in case any of them are struggling with the same things I am. So I think this is where it starts for me. This is a screenshot of a Chabad Siddur prayer book, one of the first pages of the morning prayers of Shacharit. And the school in Detroit where I went to was quite advanced, and we said many of the prayers even as the age of 5 or 6. We all knew how to read Hebrew. And I always had a hard time with this page. When I got to this page, I was stuck because there's too much text and I could not stay focused. And my mother noticed many things. She knew I was a smart little girl and I did not do well in school, not because I was misbehaving, but I just didn't do well in school. And because my mother also is the principal of a school and had to be on the cutting edge of educational science, she started to recognize symptoms. And she said to me when I was a teenager, I think I was between 14 and 16 years old, Rachela, I think you might have ADHD. And she gave me this book to read. It's called Driven to Distraction. It's by a doctor from Massachusetts named Dr. Edward Hallowell. He himself claims to have ADHD. And what's amazing about him is he took this diagnosis and said, this is not an illness. This is not a deficit. This is an asset. These people with ADHD have different style brains. And we just have to work with them a little differently. So the book is very positive and encouraging. And when I read it as a teenager, I felt like somebody was holding up a mirror because I really recognized myself. You know, till now, I had always felt different from my peers, my classmates, my siblings. You know, some things that were easy for them were hard for me. Things that were hard for them were easy for me. And this really explained things to me. And one of the things Dr. Hallowell does that's so amazing is when he sits down with a child that he is diagnosing with ADHD, he says, you have a race car brain, but your brakes are like Chevy brakes. So what our job is, we need to stimulate the brakes, and then you are going to go so far and so fast, it's going to be amazing. So that was really nice to hear. So I'm going to self-promote a little bit. I was privileged to publish 3 children's picture books that I wrote, specifically for my students, but they're out there, they're on Amazon. And I know that the creativity to write these books definitely came along. The ADHD definitely came along with them. There's not one without the other, you know, nobody has it all. So, so yeah, this is my life. This is what ADHD is not. A lot of people think of ADHD and they think of wild kids running around and not doing well in school, or a kid daydreaming and not paying attention to anything. That's not ADHD. Let's see what it is. It basically means that the brain works differently. And what I have heard, I haven't done much research, but I have heard that when they do scans of people with ADHD and people without ADHD, they really do see different ways of how the brain works. So some things would be is that people with ADHD get easily distracted, or they can be hyper-focused. So let's say I'm trying to do my laundry, I might take the clothes out of the washer and suddenly remember I have to make supper and run upstairs. And then my husband comes down and finds a bunch of wet clothes there and says, what's going on here? Well, I just forgot. But I can also hyper-focus. My husband complains that if you give me a good book, I don't hear anything. I won't hear the babies crying or anything if I'm reading a book. So, and a lot of parents will say to us, how could you say because remember, I'm a teacher, and a lot of times we need to lead parents to the recognition that their child might need some help in this area. And they say, how could you say my child has an attention issue? They can focus on the video games for hours at a time. That's not.
1 second. There's a lot of noise. 1 second. I need to see.
Did it? Done.
Yeah. Okay.
Another thing is people with ADHD, and this is what gets kids in trouble. And this is why a lot of kids with ADHD might be called lazy, because one day they can do it. They might, one day I can clean out my classroom and have everything perfectly organized. So they say, you see, you can do it. What are you using this ADHD thing as an excuse? Yeah, I did it. But you know what? It was 1,000 times harder for me to do it than for you to do it. So a lot of times in school, you'll see kids pull it together for a little bit, and then they can't, and you're wondering what's going on, and you think they're just lazy. No. You can't put in that kind of effort 100% of the time. It's just not humanly possible. People with ADHD are very creative. People think I'm some kind of idea machine. You're like, oh, I need a poem for this, or I need this kind of thing. And it's like, it's not push a button and it comes out, but that's what people think. People with ADHD have a hard time saying no. They might have ideas, but it's hard to bring it down practically. So, a lot of times I'll envision a plan for a party, an event, and it never comes out the way I want. It's never like that because all those details are hard to keep track of. People with ADHD are usually very positive, like they'll see the glass half full instead of half empty. Like, for example, I tried to say, this comes on another slide, I don't notice that my house is a mess until it's a disaster. But sometimes people with ADHD can feel down, like they compare themselves to other people because our brains are different. So when I look at my car that has bottles flying out the doors and I look at someone else's car and it's neat and the car seats are clean and there's no crumbs over there, I start to feel like something's wrong with me. People with ADHD can get frustrated easily and maybe a little moody. I know a child who was diagnosed with ADHD and is doing very well on ADHD medicine. And his main symptom was just anxiety. He was anxious about everything. And it turned out it was all the ADHD. Obviously, people with ADHD might have a hard time managing their money. Anything to do with organization. Like, I do not make Pesach. I did it once last year because it was COVID. But making Pesach, cleaning the house for Pesach is torture for me.
Okay, is it okay to stop you for a second?
Absolutely.
It's very, very interesting, especially because here is an adult talking who knows it because she is living it herself. For me, this is really extremely interesting. I just want to, for those who are viewing and who know what Pesach is, but maybe don't exactly know what the Pesach cleaning means the way we are used to it, besides just cleaning your house totally, it also means that you cannot use your kitchen that you have used for chametz, for bread and anything which is not allowed on Pesach. So we basically have to switch totally from the regular kitchen and either cover it totally up and bring in new stuff, or find a different corner in the house where you set up like a little kitchen. Everybody can do it their own way, but it's a extremely busy, complicated thing. I mean, when you're used to it, you get to understand how it works, and you get a system, and it's okay. But as Rochel describes, for her, it's something that's just not something she would be looking forward to do. So I wanted to point that out.
I'm sorry. Yes. Time management is very difficult. They say people with ADHD have 2 time zones, now and later. If something is for later, I don't have to worry about it now. Sometimes people with ADHD have a hard time, excuse me, appreciating their own strength. We also tend to overanalyze every word we say, and it comes back and repeats itself in our brains. And did I say that right? And maybe I should have explained it, and maybe I should have said Passover instead of Pesach. That's what happens inside our brains. No problem. I get it. Okay. So what can you do? So the first thing is to get diagnosed. You can get diagnosed by a family doctor, or a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. And the reason why diagnosis is so helpful is because it makes you feel validated. You go around feeling like, oh my goodness, I'm a slob. I'm terrible. No, your brain works differently. So having a doctor or a professional validate that can change everything. Like that book changed it for me. And medication can also be helpful. It's not a cure. It's not an antibiotic, but it sometimes can be compared to a good pair of shoes, let's say, right? So if you're climbing a mountain, you try climbing a mountain in slippers, that's very difficult. Put on a good pair of sneakers, you can climb the mountain, but you still have to do the work of actually putting one foot in front of the other and climbing. So the medication is like the sneakers that help you climb. But unfortunately, not everyone responds to the medication, including my hero, Dr. Hallowell. And caffeine is also a stimulant that can help. Just a cup of coffee, and that's what I use. I have my doses. I have my coffee in the morning, and then at 11 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock, and I'm good to go. One of the things Dr. Hallowell says is to marry the right person. And Sarah, if you had anything to do with raising your little brother, you did a great job.
I did.
I think you did, exactly. It was funny. My Bubby, my grandmother, who's your mother's cousin, was once in my house helping me organize the house, which I'll explain later. She did it ADHD friendly. And my Bubby was actually the one who originally suggested the shidduch between me and Menachem, because she was speaking to your aunt, and your aunt mentioned Menachem, my husband. And my Bubby saw him and she said, I like this guy. Keep him. When she was in my house, he did something that she really liked. She said, keep him. I said, Bubby, you picked him out. Thank you. So yes. So spouse helping is very important. The husband or the wife has to understand the way the brain works. To understand it's not that your husband or wife is being lazy or trying to bother you or making you upset. This is just something that they just need help with. And this guy who I keep talking about, he also wrote a book called Married to Distraction, which I think is a great title. And just an example from myself, my husband knows I do not notice the mess until there's no space to put the dishes in the sink. So forget that there's dishes in the sink until they're falling out. I sometimes don't see it. Something that helps is to prioritize. Everybody needs to prioritize. But with ADHD, it's really important to prioritize because you can get sidetracked on the task you're doing. So maybe I'm organizing the games in my classroom like I was just doing, and my goal right now is just to get the games put away so that they can wax the floor in this classroom. But I'm noticing that the board game is broken, so I'm going to go and fix that and make sure I have all the pieces. No, that's not for now. So keeping your priorities in mind and in front of you can really be helpful. My mother is my principal here. She is my boss. And as you may know, many Chabad shluchim love having guests for Shabbat and the holidays and inviting people over. And one year it was the high holidays and I was trying to invite people over and teach at the same time, and it was very stressful. And she said, I did not hire you to host people for Shabbat and holidays. I hired you to teach. Stop having guests. And that was an eye-opener for me. This, again, I told you I wrote this. I've made this presentation for other shluchot who do this work. So many times there's pressure, like, oh my goodness, the person in the next city is doing a camp. Maybe I need to do a camp. Don't look at that. You get somebody to help you prioritize and figure out what are the most important things you need to be working on at any specific moment.
I think that, you were prepared when you gave this to the shluchot during the convention. So for them, but I think anybody could relate to the different ideas that you're presenting here. If it's not, do I also need to have a guest or organize a camp? Or I think everybody in the where they're living, they always have you know, friends and people they know, and they'll always be thinking like, why is this mother being so organized with her kids, and why am I not managing, etc. So I think everybody could feel it for themselves wherever they are.
Yep. So another thing is to focus on what you're good at, and get somebody to help with what you're not. So this book over here in the picture is called Organizing Solutions for People with ADHD. It's all in pictures, very few words, and it really shows, like, for example, they say when you have a trash can or a laundry hamper, don't get a cover for it. Don't get a lid, because if you have to pick up the cover to put the thing in, that's an extra step. Don't do that. So organizing your house, your space, your office in a way that's easy for you to keep it that way can really be helpful. And not trying to work on things that are too hard for you. I can clean my house, but it takes me 3 times as long to clean my house. Better I should be doing something else and hire somebody to clean my house than do it myself just because everybody else does it.
Okay, just if I can interrupt, what if someone really does not have money to get the help?
So in that case, I would say to simplify wherever possible, to get rid of whatever, like to be minimalist and get rid of whatever you don't need in the house so that it's easy to keep clean. I'm still working on it. It's a huge work in progress.
Okay, but that's something that, yeah, would surely work. The less stuff you have, the easier it will be to clean. But isn't having a lot of stuff also part of?
Right. It's, yeah. No, and it's important to find somebody who can help set you up for success. This is where, but you know, so maybe I can, you know, so sometimes you know, you can barter things. Like I love to cook and bake. So what I would do is maybe say, I'll bake, you know, challah for you if you can come and help me organize something, or whatever. Like my grandmother came and helped me organize my house. You know, that's a gift that somebody can give, you know, that is very, very precious. Does that answer?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Being healthy is very important to be able to keep the brain going. So sleep is very important. But for people with ADHD, it's 10 times more important. My brothers and sisters all make fun of me that my phone turns off at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and it is bedtime. And I start shutting down a little earlier. I realize that in the evening, I don't get anything done anyways. Normally, I wake up at 5:30 in the morning because I have to be at work at 7:30. And by the time it's 7 o'clock in the evening, even if I tried to do something, it wouldn't happen. So that's my time to just relax a little bit and get ready for bed. And obviously, when you eat well, you feel well. No, not going to go into any details of nutrition because that means something different for everybody. For each body is different. But some studies seem to suggest that omega-3s can help the brain focus. Meditation is amazing. Some people think of meditation and mindfulness is, you know, kind of out there. And the truth is there is meditation that isn't so kosher that, how do I explain this? It's, you know, it has other connotations to it. But straight meditation of where you try to focus, let's say, only on your breath is very helpful. And in fact, the Rebbe wanted a system of kosher meditation taught and developed. My therapist, Ruth Devora Wallen, worked very hard on this and trained me to use it. And after 2 weeks of listening to her meditation tracks, I saw a huge difference, because what you do in meditation is to focus only on one thing. Either it's your breath, or it's on the breath coming out of your nose, or how your body's feeling, or whatever it is. And when a thought comes, you kind of, you don't chase it away, you just gently push it away like it's a leaf floating on the water or a cloud. And by training your brain to focus only on one thing, it really helps you learn how to focus and maintain focus, so that when you're doing something that your brain doesn't want to focus on, it has practice. It's fascinating.
Okay, so you said it took 2 weeks for you to till you saw results.
Yeah.
Okay, so but it is something that I think people, they say, yeah, I want to try, and they start and they give up very quickly.
Right, because I think there's a few reasons. Because it is almost impossible to do perfectly. Try closing your eyes for 5 minutes and only focusing on one thing, on one sound. It doesn't work, because especially for people with ADHD, our brains are going full speed ahead and they're moving. But the point of meditation is not to focus only on one thing, it's to practice dealing with the thoughts that are coming. So it's kind of like playing a game of ping pong or something like that, where the ball comes and the goal is to push it away. The goal is not to keep the ball away the whole time. The ball keeps coming and you keep pushing it away. And that's the practice that you're doing. So people get frustrated because it's like, I can't do this. There's just no way. No, that's what she taught me. That's why it was so important that I work with her. It's because when I said, I think I managed to do it for 70% of the 5 minutes. She said, stop judging yourself. That's not the point. Just the effort is what helps you. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I have a lot of tricks, games, and rewards to help me do things that I'd rather not. Sometimes on WhatsApp, like right over here, I'll make a list of everything I need to get done and send it to my husband and check off as I get it done. So I see the list happening, and that helps. And because I know he sees it, I know I have to keep working on it. Music is amazing to keep your brain just your body working and your brain occupied, or listening to a podcast or any of that. These can be dangerous. So make sure to put it in a place where you can ignore it for a little bit. So a game that I play with myself when I'm trying to clean my kitchen is I'll put it on top of the refrigerator, put on the music, and I'm only allowed to check my phone after the song finishes. Check if there's a message, I can put it away. Better keep it away for longer, but that's something you can do. Also timers. So I see the kitchen is a disaster, and I'm like totally overwhelmed by it. So I'll set a timer. I'm spending 45 minutes on this kitchen. When the timer rings, I'm stopping. So I know that there's an end. Even if I don't finish it, I know there's an end. Okay. So people talk the Hebrew words here are Yetziat Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt. And in Hasidut, we say that Mitzrayim is the same word as boundaries. And we're constantly taught in Chabad that you have to break out of your boundaries, and you need to do more, and you need to have another class and another mitzvah and another mitzvah. And sometimes when you're struggling and challenged by just basic living, it gets frustrating. Like, wait, I can't. I'm barely managing to teach every day and take care of my children, and now you want me to add something else? So I started to realize that for me, the going out of Egypt, the breaking out of boundaries, is not necessarily adding a new program or doing something new. Maybe it's organizing my closet. Maybe it's making sure I go to bed on time. Maybe it's making sure I turn my phone off for a few hours a day. When I prepared for Passover, when I did Pesach that 1 year during Corona, that was huge for me. That was an accomplishment for me that was probably on par with, other people doing a holiday program that 150 people come for. Because for me, that's how hard it was. So yeah, it's different. So I hope that answers everybody's request, gives you a little information.
Wow. Okay, so you want to do the stop sharing? Yep, thank you. This was very, very interesting. I mean, I start thinking maybe I have it as well.
We all do in some ways. The difference is, does it get in your way or not?
Yeah. Wow. It really makes me thinking like how I structure my work, my all the things I need to do, etc. I think there are some ideas here that I could use for myself. I don't know if there are any questions in the audience. Normally we don't open for questions, but if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and maybe we can give it some time. I want to know, how do you, like while you're teaching, how does the information that you have and all that you learned, how does it helps you in your work?
So the main challenge in teaching with ADHD is the classroom organization. So it's a lot of it is about learning tricks to keep the classroom organized, and switching help to help me organize the classroom. So my mother will have me, write the songs or the plays, the scripts for the plays or whatever else. And in exchange, she might hire somebody to help me organize and clean up. I also have my classroom organized in a very ADHD friendly way. My classroom is definitely my priority over my house. Because in my house, it's my family. It's not good, but the classroom, it's the children, and I can't let them lose out on it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, I also want to know, like, do you recognize
Yes. Yes.
No, I wanted to know this, and now I would like to continue on the children themselves.
So yes. So the interesting thing is the age that I teach. I teach 5 and 6 year olds. In general, at least, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, psychologists were saying they would only treat ADHD at age 8. And it makes sense not to give medication, let's say, to a little kid. Get that. And a lot of times in kindergarten, we're just noticing the beginning, a few little symptoms. Oh, this child might have ADHD. But because the classroom and the demands are set up in a way that is child friendly, and because they're so young, we don't always know if this is just maybe maturity or ADHD. So what we do in our school is we have these little forms and these little checklists that were made. We order them, we have them from somewhere else. And when we notice a child might have some ADD symptoms, maybe, another condition that mirrors it is called sensory integration disorder, where a child is uncomfortable in their body and doesn't know their spatial awareness. So we'll fill out this checklist and just put it away. I put it in the child's file. Obviously, if a child is having a challenge with an area, we'll do our best to make it easier for them. And like this year, I had a child that had a very hard time staying focused on their work. And this year was very different in general because of COVID. We had to have the classroom and the tasks set up differently. So I would have him work next to me so that I could keep him focused, because every time he saw what his friends were doing, he wanted to wander around. But we'll have this form filled out. And then next year, when the teachers are again noticing challenges that the child has, they'll fill out the same form, and we'll compare the two forms and say, oh, this probably isn't maturity. This is probably ADHD. We should look further into it. But the age group that I'm in, it's real, they're too young to start really diagnosing in most cases.
Hmm. So the way you deal with it in your school is very professional and very practical, because the way you're following the child will help to give the child the right diagnose and help they need as soon as it's possible to really diagnose if it's ADHD.
Right. And then
Okay.
at the same time, we will use whatever methods we have, like I said, but then one of the other very important methods for all children with any challenge is to recognize the child's strengths and build on those strengths. So that's something we do right away. We don't need a diagnosis for that. We don't need a form for that. That is super, super important when teaching any child.
Right. That's what you're saying. You don't have to wait till a child has a diagnosis. You can tell Menachem it's fine. We stop at 9. You can pick up the kids, right?
Yes, I'm picking up the kids. It's only 20 minutes away.
Yeah. Okay. We'll keep our schedule as planned. Yeah, it's something I think that all teachers should be working on. When you see a child who is having difficulties in a certain area, you always need to try to focus on the good area, on the things that the child is doing well, and put all the emphasis and the compliments and the strength. And wow, you did this so amazing. That's something that you need to do with any child. But like what you said, if you are thinking maybe this child does have the symptoms and you can't have a diagnosis until a certain age, then yes, for sure, a child should get this area strengthened and help. So do you also have like that you advise parents in this?
I think it's important for parents to understand what's going on, to understand that the child is not lazy and that the child is trying very hard, and that some basic tasks are just much, much harder for that child than for others. And as much as possible, to make the environment at home and at school to make it a way that the child could be as successful as possible. So whether that means having a set place and time for homework and having things organized for the child can all be very helpful for a child with ADHD.
Okay. I think we should be closing off slowly. Is there something like what you wish to give over to the audience today?
So I just said about making sure the child can be as successful as possible, but it's interesting. There's a fine line between helping your child perfect.
You got stuck?
Huh?
Yeah. By me, you were stuck.
Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, yeah, it says my internet connection is, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Helicopter parents, and then they said snowplow parents. So it's helicopter parents are parents that hover and are constantly, the lunch that the child forgot, they bring it. And snowplow parents are the ones that push the snow out of the way so the child can go through easily. But that's not good either. That we see that a lot, where children don't have to do anything for themselves and don't have to work through a challenge. And then when they're adults, or even when they're 5 and they don't know how to tie their shoelace or they don't know how to put their coat on, it's not good. And it's concerning. And there's, so At the same time as addressing a child's need, it's okay for a child to go through the challenges of childhood, even having ADHD and other things. One of my favorite sayings, I don't know who said it, I just saw it on Facebook somewhere, is that instead of making a better world for our children, let's make better children for our world.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is a message for all people, especially parents of people working with others, that, yeah, a lot of people could learn from, because we always want to protect those we are in charge of, if it's our children, our students, or the people you work with. You always want to protect the one who is weaker than you. But as you explain, it's not always good, because if everything is done for them and everything is prepared and everything is smoothed out, the child will not learn to have challenges. And a child needs to learn to be able to go into the big world, which is not always so easy and smooth. Yeah, I think it's something that it's easier said than done. It also depends on the way how your own upbringing was, on the way how you got educated, and the ideas that you formulated yourself. Because I mean, for example, I can see it in our daycare. There are parents that they are so protective to their children, and on the other side, you see parents who are very easygoing, and they just say, you know, you want to try to climb this tree, be my guest and see what happens. And the child falls, and the mother will give a kiss and say, that's okay, nothing bad happened, you tried, the next time it will go better, etc. So you see in parenting nowadays a lot of different kind of parents. I always say, you know, people should be open to new ideas. People should be willing to hear the knowledge that's out there. And for example, the knowledge that you shared with us tonight, I think it's so important for people to understand and to hear it, because it could make such a difference for those who are struggling. So that was really very, very interesting. I want to thank you so much for making the time for this, because I know you have extremely busy schedule. My U vacation started, thank God. We still have 3.5 weeks to go. And daycare never stops. I mean, we do take 1 week off, but I'm sure that when you have vacation, then there's still lots of things to do. So lots of hatzlacha, of success in everything you do. And thank you so much for joining us here tonight, this afternoon.
Well, thank you for having me. And how do you say, goedenavond? Did I remember my Dutch well?
Yes, very correct. Thank you so much. And now you have to rush to get your kids.
The kids, yes.
Okay, so have a wonderful rest of the day and a good evening to everybody.
Laila tov.
Laila tov.